You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. Today, my guest is Olga Ravasi. Olga is from the Christian Orthodox Coalition in the United States of America. What is that, you might ask? I tend to think of it as almost like a COCUS. Well, that's what the initials stand for, COCUS, if you will, Christian Orthodox Coalition in the United States. It's a nonprofit organization whose mission is to educate, empower, and engage collective Christian Orthodox voices in the cultural and social discourse, as well as the civic process via the conservative virtues of our faith. Go check out their website. Just type in Christian Orthodox Coalition. I'm going to link to it in the show notes page, of course, for this episode, but their issues, very neat. I think you guys are going to enjoy this. Spiritual and cultural wars, war on children, open border and immigration, endless wars, law and order, religious freedom, and globalization. I think this is a chat you guys are going to be very interested in. It's about time Orthodox Christian voices get a seat at the table, if you will, in the political discourse here. Without further ado, let's get to Olga right now. Olga Ravasi, welcome to the show, ma'am. How are you?
Thank you. Doing well and good to be with you.
Good to be with you. We're going to talk about the Christian Orthodox Coalition, giving a voice to the voiceless, which is recently, it just kind of came up on my radar through a mutual friend of ours, Melissa. And I want to get into all of that. I also know that you have a fascinating background. And so I want you to talk about who you are, what you do, and kind of where you came from, because I think we're going to get into this, but maybe some of that helped shape your worldview.
Yes. So I was born in Belgrade, Serbia, today's Serbia, what was then known as Yugoslavia. And in the 1990s, with the horrible war, civil war breaking out in Yugoslavia and disintegrating that country, that split into 6 different countries, which were previously republics. Within Yugoslavia, I came to the United States as a legal immigrant and an American by choice in 1994. And ever since then, obviously being touched by the political situation in the region that I come from, the political developments have been a part of my upbringing, due to my family's background as well. When we came here, my father and I helped him with this. We started Serbian Radio Chicago. So that's been one of the most prominent media outlets for American Serbs here in the diaspora, but also for others from the former Yugoslav region, or what we call today the Balkans. So anything that was happening politically back then kind of went through my house, hence, my fascination with politics and all of the things that were then connecting to the United States approach to the region and to different conflicts that were happening around the world. So I went ahead and my PhD, I got, went through college and master's, and then my PhD was kind of focused on U.S. foreign policy towards the Balkans in the 1990s, with a special focus on Kosovo and Metohija. And that kind of brought me into sort of the not only U.S. political life, but my expertise and my knowledge of the region and knowledge of different languages kind of brought me into areas of foreign policy, counterterrorism, intelligence, and security in general. So I served as a special advisor to the Secretary General of Interport Police, again, focusing on counterterrorism, transnational crimes, and foreign policy. I do carry a designation of a highly qualified expert per the Directorate of National Intelligence. And then since 2016, with the focus that I have in my expertise, I worked under President Trump's administration with several organizations that were non-governmental and international, focusing again on the same things: counterterrorism, transnational crimes, and foreign policy. So in 2020, a lot of those contracts that we had and a lot of the work that we were doing around the world stopped with President Trump's departure from the White House, and the State Department kind of told some of my colleagues, don't ever call us again, which was very interesting. And again, based on things that we stumbled upon in other areas around the world that unfortunately our people are involved with, our politicians, our bureaucrats, our establishment. So in 2020, I also led part of President Trump's election coalition, which was Serbian Americans for Trump. So that coalition actually existed since 2016 informally, and then it became much more formal and much more organized in 2020. In 2016, particularly the districts in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin that were populated not only by Serbian Americans, but some of the immigrants from the former Yugoslavia, from the Balkan region, and I would say Orthodox Christians, actually managed to swing those districts from Hillary to Trump. So that is the momentum that I recognize, that we need to not only tap into some of these untapped voting blocks, like Serbian community, for example, but it became very evident in 2020, and now that we're moving into 2024 election, that Orthodox Christian communities generally are not a population that show up on the census, that show up in voting data, that show up on election maps or electoral maps. I think it's a community that can be tapped into, that can be considered a powerful voting bloc. I think we're operating with numbers between 10 and 12 million of Orthodox Christians in the United States, cradled, and then Americans who are turning into towards Orthodoxy. So it's a big number. And as I said, specifically, those numbers are in swing states. So hence some of my activities within campaigns and within President Trump's election campaign in 2020, and now certainly something to discuss for November, which is right around the corner.
I'm going to go out on a limb and correct me if I'm wrong. I assume, well, for one, I don't think Kamala has a chance, just my personal thought, but if she were to win, I feel like there would be less of an ear in her organization towards listening to Orthodox Christians. Would you say that's the case, or would there be an opening there?
100%. I believe that would be the case. Although I think there's a discussion to be had about Kamala Harris's footprint in general, because she really has no policy behind her. I mean, what are the things or the policies that she has and the legacy that she has left behind thus far is detrimental to many communities. I don't think Orthodox Christians kind of fall out of that scope. But if you look at communities of color, if you look at what she's done in California, if you look at what she's done as a senator and then what she's done now as a vice president, her record really clearly speaks for itself. And it's, very, very detrimental to the communities we are talking about. So I don't think there will be an ear there. However, I think she is also trying to differentiate herself from her predecessors, which is why her campaign may be a little more open to hear other communities and to hear issues that her predecessors have either messed up on or done badly on, because she's desperately now trying to create some sort of a narrative for herself that should be different from the Clintons, from Obamas, from the Bidens. I don't know how successful they are, but I do know that they have tried to tap into the Armenian community, for example, particularly in Pennsylvania. So if you look at Pennsylvania, there are about 350,000 Orthodox Christians there. I'm talking about all Orthodox Christians. And I know that she has started some form of communication with Armenian Christians, because there are specific organizations within the Armenian community that are friendly to the Democrats. So that is the part that I know. But on the other side, I know for a fact, simply because I am and I have been part of President Trump's campaign, there is much more of an ear on that side. There are people who understand not only Christian Orthodox issues, because we can't put those into like the same pot. We are not homogenous. We are not one community, but at the same time, there are those things that connect us, and they're very basic, which is our Christian Orthodox faith. And our Christian Orthodox faith clearly drives us towards conservative issues, which is where we can find our natural allies and, the natural access to who we can have as friends and supporters. So I am pretty sure that we have an ear in President Trump's campaign, and I have opened those doors already, having been a part of it since 2016 and especially in 2020. They were very, very friendly, and they continue to be friendly to the Serbian American community because the issues of Serbs and Serbia and its disputed province of Kosovo and Metohija was a very big piece of President Trump's foreign policy. So I have worked closely with Ambassador Richard Grenell on that, because he was the special envoy for Serbia and Kosovo. So again, as I said, the table is ours. Those ears are open, and we certainly have much more of a friendly environment in President Trump's realm, and they will be open to hear other Orthodox Christian communities, which is what we are trying to do right now.
Yeah, and I've heard it said that J.D. Vance has specifically said his opinion on what's going on in Ukraine and how our State Department funding through NATO, et cetera, is shutting down the true Orthodox Church there, that he's actually against that. Have you heard that as well?
Yes, he has. So you have J.D. Vance, you have several congressional representatives, several senators that we have worked with, even Senator Ron Johnson. You have several Congress people that are Orthodox Christians themselves, and I have been in touch with those. Then you have people like Tucker Carlson and Jack Posobiec and all of these influencers and big media people who understand the depth of what is happening in Ukraine and how the Orthodox Christian Church actually plays a huge role in a lot of this, and not only in Ukraine, but elsewhere. If you look at the Middle East, if you look at, again, back to the Balkan Peninsula and former Yugoslavia and Serbia in particular, I would say that Orthodox Christians are the most prosecuted or persecuted Christian communities around the world. And, in particular, when you look at the Middle East and what is happening now, yes, we understand the conflict between the Israelis and the Muslim communities, but it is actually Christians overall that bear the brunt of these conflicts, and nobody talks about them.
Right. There's a number, not insignificant number of Christians in Palestine and
yes, absolutely, and in Lebanon. I mean, Lebanon was a Christian country,
right?
And yes, you are right. There are Orthodox Christian churches, some of the oldest ones in what is called Palestine. So it's a conversation to be had. If you look at Armenia and Azerbaijan, if you look at every burning part of the earth, essentially, where you have either a frozen conflict or an ongoing hot conflict, you are hitting across Orthodox Christians. And there is a reason for that. And I think the main premise of what I am trying to do, not only in this election cycle, but even post-November, is to bring about the conversation about who Orthodox Christians are in the United States, why we are a relevant segment. Many will argue that I actually saw, and from what I understand, he's very well respected, and I would hope to meet him. But one of the priests from, I can't remember which parish now, kind of said that we are making a mistake thinking of Orthodox Christians and Christians in general as a voting bloc. I beg to differ.
Right.
I think we can be a voting bloc. We are a voting bloc, but there are very specific reasons why some Christians stay home, why they do not vote. We just had an event in Chicago with General Mike Flynn, who is not an Orthodox Christian, who is actually a devout Catholic, but understand how we can make this core issue for all of the Christians, in fact, not only Orthodox Christians, and how we can become a voting bloc. And he was the one who actually informed me that in 2020, 30 million Christians overall stayed home, did not vote.
Wow.
Now, we are probably likely aware of the reasons why, but hence even more important now more than ever for us to unify, to get together, first of all, as Orthodox Christians, and then discuss why we stay home, why we do not vote, why we are not considered a homogeneous voting bloc. As I said, yes, we don't look at all of the issues the same. We are not, all looking at even domestic or international policies through the same lens. But the common basic denominator between all of us is our Christian faith, whether it's Orthodox, whether it's Catholic. And there are some conservative values and traditions to be talked about and to be then discussed with our elected officials, and how we can be moving those elected officials towards discussing the issues that are of our concern.
Once a month, my supporters of this show and myself and a special guest have a Zoom meeting. It's not recorded, it's not posted, it's just private. It's between you guys, the guest, and myself. I do this because it means a lot for you guys who support me by showing me that this show means a lot to you. I love talking with you. I look at it as like a benefit for people that support the show, but it's really a benefit for me. I get to know you guys and have an off-the-record discussion with our guest. And, sometimes topics you don't want to necessarily have all the ins and outs discussed online, if you know what I mean. So to be in this group, please go to patreon.com/counterflow and donate $5 or more per month. And it gets you in this club. We do it once a month. It's a great time. It's great people. They're all smarter than me. So that's an upgrade from what you're used to. I can tell you that. The guests are always guests that people want to hear from. A lot of you guys will be familiar with many of the guests. Father Turbo's done it. Father Deacon Ananias has done it. David Patrick Carey's done it. My own priest, Father Ignatius, has done it. Father Moses McPherson's done it. It's a very good time, and I think you guys would enjoy it. If you love this content, please go to patreon.com/counterflow, $5 or more per month. Thank you. You mentioned earlier that being Serbian Orthodox, naturally you have an inclination to be a conservative politically, let's say. Did kind of experiencing the ruins of communism help that worldview as well?
Somewhat. And I mentioned to you earlier, between those of us who are born into Orthodoxy versus some of you who find Orthodoxy later in life, and God bless you for that. You guys do your research. You're much more involved in discussions on theology, where for those of us that were born with it, we just kind of go with the flow. It was something that was given to us. And I'm not going to say that we, take advantage of it or take it for granted, but you guys certainly do much more of a theological discussion, and you dive deeply into what the issues are and what Orthodoxy really is and what it means. And I believe that it is incredible that more and more Americans are finding Orthodoxy and turning to Orthodoxy because they are seeing it as a direct and a very authentic access to God and to faith. And I think that is very commendable. So yes, Yugoslavia was, and I wouldn't say it was a communist country per se, because if you look at the countries that were behind the Iron Curtain, like the Soviet Union or Bulgaria or Romania or Poland, they really, or even Ukraine for that matter, which was part of the Soviet Union at the time, or even Albania, that was a hardcore communism where religion was completely forbidden. Exactly. Albania was the one who constitutionally, under Enver Hoxha, was the only country where constitutionally you were forbidden to practice any religion. Where Yugoslavia, on the other hand, was kind of a balance, and it was part of the non-aligned movement. So Yugoslavia was not behind the Iron Curtain. So we were very Western in our upbringing. I mean, we grew up with rock music and Disney and, Levi's and Converse shoes. So for us, that was kind of the natural inclination to be westernized culturally. But yet there were elements of orthodoxy that we found much later in the 1990s, because during the Yugoslavia time, it was much more of a socialist communist combination. So the I guess civics and the economics were much more socialized, but then our access to culture and to what we were driven by were much more Western. So Yugoslavia was that weird experiment and an odd mix of things, where other countries really were behind the Iron Curtain and really didn't have access at all to any kind of religion. So when communism started falling apart with the fall of Berlin Wall, yes, many people went back to what their common traditional cultural tenets were, which were based in their Christian religion. And of course, most of those countries are Orthodox Christians. So I would say communism was just a speck of dust in the lengthy histories of these countries. But at the same time, yes, it was a speck of dust that we kind of ended up living through, and then turning back to, as I said, what was the core of our culture, of our tradition, of our spirituality, which is Orthodox Christianity. So a lot of people kind of went back to it in the 1990s when communism was falling apart. And when Soviet Union fell apart. But, with Soviet Union falling apart, with Warsaw Pact disappearing, that is when NATO also did not really have a role anymore.
Right.
But they didn't want to disappear because, those generals got really comfortable with the money and the transfer of wealth and the positions that they were having. But NATO really was obsolete at that time. So through the breakup of Yugoslavia and the fallout of Yugoslavia, NATO kind of caught a second wind and found its purpose yet again, and repurposed itself, I would argue, since Yugoslavia into what we see today, into not a defensive alliance, which was its original purpose, but into a very offensive, aggressive alliance, which in fact then got involved in Yugoslavia and got involved in Serbia, NATO-led bombing, or I would say US-led bombing of NATO in the 1990s of a sovereign country that never threatened the United States, that had nothing to do with any kind of threatening moves towards any NATO nation to even invoke Article 5. So a lot of this goes, as I said, through countries that are Orthodox Christian, and how NATO reinvented it, found its new purpose, and how the United States actually started seeing these countries and what the relationship is in terms of international relations that we have. So my, I guess, turn to Orthodoxy was a part of that upbringing, that we didn't much care for religion, but then yet it was part of our life culturally, traditionally. And then, of course, it became much stronger, as I said, with the breakup of Yugoslavia and with everything that was happening. Subsequently, me moving here to the United States and then seeing how the communities that moved to the United States after World War II were actually much more religious. They kept their Christian Orthodox roots. And those were the reasons why most of them actually even found refuge in the United States, because after World War II, the communists were very, very strong and were looking down upon and even sending some people to prisons for being Orthodox Christians or any other Christians or practicing any other religion. So all of those communities that migrated here after World War II were much more seeped into their Christian tenets and into their Christian values than those who remained and who grew up in Yugoslavia, or, as I said, behind Iron Curtain in any of those countries.
Let's talk some more about the Christian Orthodox Coalition. Is it a caucus of sorts? Could we call it that? Or is I don't know.
So the reason why we are calling it, so that's an acronym because it's Christian Orthodox Coalition in the United States.
Okay.
So short COCUS.
Okay.
Which is, the name that we came up with, or one of our team members came up with. So Christian Orthodox Coalition kind of grew out of this initiative that was Serbian Americans for Trump. As I said, I worked around the country and I understood that not only Serbian Americans, but some of these other communities were untapped as a voting bloc, and not only untapped as a voting bloc, but were disenfranchised from the political process, from the civic process, and were not really represented culturally or, civically in any way, because Orthodox Christians are not some separate entity within the United States. We were here since the creation of this nation. We are very much part of the fabric of this great nation. In the late 1700s, the first missionaries came to Alaska and started spreading the faith. And then in the 1800s, the Russians, the Serbs, and the Greeks created the first Christian Orthodox parish in California. And that church actually still stands today. So as Orthodox Christian communities, we have been a part of this nation. And there are many Orthodox Christian Americans who actually have contributed greatly to what this nation is, to the founding fabric of this country. You are from Texas. So, for example, George Fisher or George Shagic, a Serb, led the Texas Revolution. Nikola Tesla gave us electricity, who was also Serbian American and Orthodox Christian. So, as I said, we are not some separate entity that just exists here and that should be just grateful to be here. We are very much a part of this fabric, and we need to have our voices heard. So, Christian Orthodox Coalition as an organization came about with this mission to actually organize, educate, and empower Orthodox Christian communities to participate in the civic life and to educate essentially Americans about who Orthodox Christians are, because essentially everybody knows who the Protestants are, who the Catholics are, who the Jews are, who the evangelicals are. But you say Orthodox Christians and everybody goes, what? What is that? When you hear the word Orthodox, many people connect it to Judaism, but that is very, very different. And then those who know a little teeny bit, you say Orthodox Christians, and then they politically immediately go, oh, little Russians.
Yes.
Which is politically an issue we are currently dealing with, so we can address that as well. But as I said, Christian Orthodox Coalition was an organization that kind of grew out of this idea that Orthodox Christians should be a unified front and should be a front that has a seat at the table with our elected officials. And as much as I realize that the church itself is there to take care of our spiritual life as members of community, we also must be taking care of our civic life and not to compromise the church in any way, because the church cannot get involved in civics or politics, essentially, or even elections. But we as representatives of that church, we as parishioners and members of community must be involved and should be involved. And that is actually what we are advocating. So Christian Orthodox Coalition is a nonprofit organization that was founded in Florida. And we are, of course, looking to educate people on who we are in this phase one. And that, as I said, in phase two, post-November, because I am thinking that this organization should have longevity, we need to make sure that we have a seat at the table with political representatives, with elected officials, and actually represent the issues of our specific communities and represent the issues that are burning with us, not only domestically, but also in the international arena.
Is there a challenge that you guys have as to, let's say, you're more closely aligned with conservative politics, certainly with the Trump campaign. Is there a challenge to help educate other Christians, let's say Protestants or just regular American Christians, on the dangers of Zionism and the support Israel no matter what, which has kind of been ingrained in American Christians for the last couple of decades? Does that pose, how is that for you?
That is an interesting question for Orthodox Christians, because Orthodox Christianity obviously views um, the theological discussions of what you are asking me
Yes.
In a very different light compared to the evangelicals. And I think the Catholics do as well. I think everybody sees it differently. And I think the expectation is that everybody should view it through the evangelical light. And that is not quite accurate. And that is not something that you or I can decide. That is actually the conversation that the wider Orthodox Christian Church is having, the wider Christian Catholic Church is having, and they are certainly viewing that very differently from the evangelicals, and obviously from differently from how even the Jewish communities are seeing it, because
Right.
even within the Jewish communities, there's some disagreement within how they view Zionism, how they view Israel. So these are certainly conversations to be had, stemming from what our spiritual fathers are telling us, and then going into the communities and educating not only other Christians, but also educating the elected officials
Right.
on what the visions are and what the views are. And as I said, you look at every single conflict currently today, including the one in the Middle East, there are many Christians that are impacted by it, and many Orthodox Christians that are impacted by it, and people are not talking about these communities. So it is something that will be a challenge for us in the future. It is a conversation that we are open to having, and it is a conversation that we should be having. But I think first and foremost, what we need to do as Orthodox Christians together, cradled and those who turn to Orthodoxy, such as yourself, is to expand our network, to start unifying within the communities and within some of these basic conversations that we can have. What are the points of agreement, first and foremost? We will talk about the points of disagreements later on, but I think what we can find as our common ground is our common Christian faith, which leans conservative then by default, which is why I'm saying we are, if you look at our organization, Christian Orthodox Coalition, you look at the names, and some are very prominent names within the organization. Yes, you understand that most of these people came from the orbit of President Trump. However, I think the organization itself is a non-for-profit organization that is not labeling itself with any individual, not President Trump, not Biden, not anybody, essentially, but there is a core understanding that we are Christians, that we are conservatives, that we are American patriots first and foremost, and that we are willing to have these conversations first within our own Christian Orthodox communities, and then expand that wider and educate others on how we view any policy.
What are some of those? Who are some of those names that you were just referencing that are bigger?
So I'm the executive director of the organization. George Papadopoulos is the president of our board. Simona Mangiante, who is an investigative journalist, is part of the board. John Pierce, who is an attorney who represents most of the January 6th cases, is on the board. Filmmaker Igor Lopatanok is on the board. He is Ukrainian-born filmmaker who very often works with filmmaker Oliver Stone and is mostly known from his great documentary, Ukraine on Fire.
Yes.
We just had launching event of Christian Orthodox Coalition in Chicago. And during the launch event, General Mike Flynn was the headline guest speaker. We actually screened a world premiere documentary that was also produced and directed by Igor Lopatanok, and the interviews were done by Simona Mangiante and Sean Stone, Oliver Stone's son. And the documentary is called Hunter's Laptop Requiem for Ukraine, which is kind of like a second part of the documentary Ukraine on Fire. So we have a great lineup within our organization. We also have a gentleman called Nick Dorneanu. He is Romanian born, and he sits on the board of the Trump organization, not the campaign, but the company itself in Chicago. So as I said, you can see our board and our leadership, and you understand that most of them come from the Trump orbit. But as I said, we're not, putting anybody's name into the organization. We are just looking to expand our network. We are looking to represent Orthodox Christian communities properly. And we are looking to be the civic wing of the Christian Orthodox communities that has never been done before.
Right.
No such organization has existed in the past because people, rightfully so, flock to Christian Orthodox churches, which is kind of the basis of our communities. But I don't think we have proper representation and access in the civic arena, and if you will, the political arena, in the advocacy arena. And I think as Orthodox Christians and members of community, we must ourselves, each and every one of us, must be that arm that in fact will stretch out towards our elected officials and have a seat at the table and discuss some of these issues and make sure that our community is heard and our community is represented.
In my experience, anytime Orthodoxy, true Christianity, starts to rear its head, you're going to find some attacks coming your way. This podcast is not like Joe Rogan by any means, but I've been involved in hit pieces in magazines in Texas. And I saw you forwarded me a hit piece that involved you as well. So I would say congratulations. That means you're doing something right. And I can tell you're pretty bold.
I wear it as a badge of honor.
Yes, good. What can you explain what that was all about? And why do you think, what was the motive behind that?
Yes, so interestingly enough, right after we launched Christian Orthodox Coalition several months ago, certain investigative journalists, which I believe are very deeply connected to the deep state or the swamp or the intel community, whatever you want to call it, started kind of poking around and started immediately creating this false manufactured narrative around Russia. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at President Trump's campaign and what was done to him and how the agencies around the country got weaponized to target him and essentially to target all of his supporters and to put a target on the foreheads of 80 million plus Americans who voted for him, you can actually recognize the blueprint of some of this that was done around the world as well, within the framework of regime change and colored revolutions and things like this. I specifically have an expertise in this arena, and I have lived through some of that. So some of us that recognize these patterns saw it immediately in 2016. We saw it in 2020. So as I said, the swamp immediately starts going for that low-hanging fruit, and they start picking at people who have and who disagree with the mainstream narrative on whatever issue you want to bring up, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Serbia, whether it's whatever the State Department cause du jour is, or as they say, the international community. But the international community is only those several countries that are under the paw of the NATO and State Department and Brussels, bureaucracy essentially is the permanent bureaucratic state and the parallel state, the parallel government that runs our affairs. They start targeting people who have been in Trump's orbit, who have defended him, and who have fought for him to get elected in 2016, in 2020. So naturally, most of us that are part of this coalition are on that list already. We have been attacked viciously because we disagree with certain mainstream narratives. And so when we launched this coalition, there was an investigative journalist that started poking around and started framing the narrative of Christian Orthodox Coalition and Serbs for Trump and all of these people that we have in our orbit within President Trump's coalition, calling them Russian agents, Russian spies, even though there's really no communication with Russia, with Moscow. There is no trace of any of this, but of course, you don't need proof, you don't need arguments, you don't need anything. They may manufacture narratives because they have done it, quite frankly, ever since the 1990s, and nobody questioned those narratives because the mainstream was able to get away with it. And the journalists, they don't have any integrity. They actually have become political activists, and they have specifically become political activists of only one wing of the political party or of the uniparty, essentially. But then the conservative wing of the Republican Party is labeled all kinds of names. Not only that we are Russian spies, you are labeled all kinds of things in the book, racist, bigots, misogynist, and whatever else fits the day. So in The Guardian recently, right after our launching event in Chicago, an attack piece appeared yet again, naming several of us, not only as members of the Christian Orthodox Coalition, but also board members of a journalistic portal called Intelligence Online or Intelligence Today. So they are framing the narrative around this portal, which is a news media portal registered in Los Angeles that is run by our friend George Eliason, who has been an investigative journalist for most of his life, who spent last 10 years in the Donbass area investigating that war. They are trying to frame that media outlet as a Russia propaganda outlet. So The Guardian actually conveniently created this narrative around Christian Orthodox Coalition and Serbs for Trump and intelligence portal, because a lot of the names kind of, go from one organization to the other, and framing us as people who are spreading Russian propaganda. So it is insane. It is the same framework that they've, launched at us before. Nothing new here. But yes, as I said, I wear these attacks as a badge of honor. And you're right. That means we're doing something right. And more importantly, it means that we are attacking properly and with arguments and with proof their narrative, that anytime you put it against, the true fact checkers, their narrative completely falls apart.
Yes. As we speak now, this is a bit of an off topic, but not totally. As we speak now, the vice presidential candidate debate was last night. Did you watch that?
Yes, I did.
What were your thoughts?
So I think J.D. Vance did great. He was very composed, very straight to the point, armed with facts. And he fact-checked the fact checkers, the two women who, again, are acting as Democrat activists rather than journalists with integrity who are there on a fact-finding mission. Tim Walz was very uncomfortable, came off very nervous, and actually not nervous when he speaks, but he was extremely nervous when he was silent. His body language was very awkward. So, I find it very strange that for all that it is, Democrat Party cannot find people who are composed, who don't have the crazy eyes, who have their facts straight, who know what is in their own bills that they have apparently passed in their own states as governors, who don't talk to us about passage of time in circles consistently. I truly don't understand. We may disagree on policy. We may disagree on issues. How is it that within this legacy of the Democrat Party, they cannot find candidates that actually can stand on their own 2 feet, that can present us facts, and that can present some kind of a sound policy that doesn't sound so insane and so unhinged, and they can do it in a composed manner? That is actually something that I find very fascinating. We have a dementia patient president that is gone missing in action. We have these devastating floods that are striking Florida and Georgia and Tennessee and North Carolina. People are dying. People are without water. People are without food. And our president is, I think, on the beach somewhere. Our vice president is campaigning and cannot put one coherent sentence together. And her vice presidential pick last night completely fell apart in a debate that was 3 against 1, because he had all the help that he can have from the 2 moderators. And, I think J.D. Vance came absolutely out on top in this debate because, as I said, he came out armed with facts, came out straight to the point, and, was composed, was calm, didn't attack anybody, and, had all of his ducks in a row. So I think we're in good shape.
Yes, I agree. So you said earlier, from 2016 to 2020, people had inroads, ties to the Trump organization, let's say. And then once Biden, quote unquote, won, you were said basically that they were told, just lose this phone number. We don't want to hear from you anymore. For the people, there's always been this argument in my circles, is Trump really an outsider? What's his status there? I look at it as, yes, he is an outsider, because if he's not, this game is so rigged and fake that if he's part of it, we might as well be done with this. But the fact that
he's part of it, they would never target him like this.
Correct.
He would
totally
never
agree.
be targeted in such a way.
Right.
I mean, for God's sakes, a man almost lost his life. Twice now.
Yes. Yeah. So you just kind of answered my question. Then from an insider's perspective that you somewhat have, you would agree that he is definitely looked upon as the enemy by the regime.
Well, absolutely. And you have to kind of look at the reasons why. So as I just mentioned, we are dealing with these devastating floods and the fallout of Helene. Meanwhile, our incompetent representatives are sending billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine, to Taiwan, to Israel, to every single part of the world that views America and Americans as enemies, that burns our flag, that cannot stand us. But yet our own Americans are dying. They don't have food. They don't have water. And President Biden 2 days ago, from what I understand, said, we sent all we have to North Carolina. We've got nothing for them. So how does that make sense? Make it make sense. This is my request. This is all about request. So if President Trump really was a part of it, number one, they wouldn't target him in such a way. And number two, the biggest reason why he is targeted, because they know that the flow of money is coming to an end. And that is the reason why they targeted him last time. You must remember, 4 years of President Trump's administration, no war. Right now, the world is imploding. We had peace. He was the president of peace. He was actually bringing all of these kind of creative solutions to even frozen conflicts around the world. I mentioned Serbia and Kosovo. He was looking at it through economic development. He said, forget all of this recognition, non-recognition, forget the bureaucrats, forget the nonsense that you're getting from the European Union, from the Brussels bureaucrats, because what they are trying to do is actually extend their paychecks, extend their reason for existing. So they will never bring you solutions, because there's no money in solutions. There is money and reason to exist when there's constant conflict. That is how NATO continues to exist. Constant conflict. So the perpetual conflict, the perpetual warfare, the perpetual sending of money is what President Trump wanted to end, which is why they are targeting him. Anytime you don't understand what is happening in the world, as they say, follow the money. So he wanted to stop the flow of money. If you saw Zelensky the other day when he met with President Trump, he looked like he had a root canal done. And that is kind of how you want a foreign leader to look next to your president. You don't want him to be smiles and happy faces with your elected representatives and bringing bags of money out of the country. You actually want him to look like he had dental work done. And that's exactly how he looked with President Trump, who said, yeah, we have a good relationship with Ukraine, but we also have a great relationship with Russia and President Putin. And why shouldn't we have a great relationship with them? Why shouldn't we have a relationship with China? Why shouldn't we have constructive relationship with some of these countries that we see as adversaries? We can have economic development with them. We can cooperate economically, but they can't screw us over. We can't, offshore our jobs consistently And, they're taking all of our tax money. So yes, we can have a constructive relationship. We can have an economic relationship, but that relationship has to be fair. Up until now, the relationship hasn't been fair. So when you look at all of these issues that I'm talking about, and I know I mentioned a lot, but they actually span economy, they span international conflicts and foreign policy. What Americans don't quite understand, and they're beginning to understand it now, is that economy is directly connected to how they go grocery shopping.
Yes.
What they pay at the gas pump.
Yes.
Foreign policy directly affects their economy.
Yes.
And if you don't care about foreign policy and you don't care about history and you don't care about geography, trust me, it's going to care about you when you go to that gas station and when you go to buy bread and milk and eggs and bacon, because all of those prices are now, 3 times more, 4 times more, 5 times more than what they were under President Trump. So those who hate President Trump as personality, and people can do that, but all I want to ask them 4 years later, are you better off today than what you were during President Trump's administration?
Yes.
Don't talk about cult of personality. There shouldn't be a narrative about personality. It should be about policy, and it should be about how everyday Americans go about their life, and are they better off today than they were? Are there more jobs today than they had even during COVID time? Remember, we got impacted by the pandemic, which that's a whole other conversation.
Yes.
Were you better off under President Trump with the pandemic going on than what you are today? So that is the questions that Americans must answer for themselves. They shouldn't talk about individuals. They should talk about how they live their life today.
Right. I see all of these Ukraine flags. The trendy things to do is to place these.
Yes.
And now we got to give money to Israel no matter what. And it's like, this is all that giving money to Israel, giving money to Ukraine. That's why your things are more expensive. You create more money. It makes every dollar cheaper.
And why don't we have FEMA rescuing Americans right now is because we've given all of this stuff to other countries. So we don't have anything to offer to the Americans that are now dying in North Carolina and Georgia and Tennessee and Florida, because we sent everything away and we have nothing. And it is actually a very dangerous position to be finding ourselves in, because God forbid, and I argue this consistently, we do not have a foreign enemy. Nobody is looking to target America. Nobody is looking to target us and to attack us here. We are going to implode internally.
Yes.
And that is actually the biggest fear that we all have. And what I'm afraid of, even in November, no matter what the outcome is, and we are already being groomed and prepared that we will not know the outcome on election day. We won't know it a week later, a month later, 3 months later. How is that possible? So they are already preparing us for some kind of civil unrest. They are preparing us for, no matter what the outcome is, people are going to be unhappy because the nation is so polarized and the nation is finding itself completely torn apart because our elected leaders cannot and will not and refuse to take care of Americans.
Yes, well put. As we get out of here, I want to give you the floor. Say anything you'd like for people to understand about the Christian Orthodox Coalition, anything we've left out, and give it a pitch, any of that, Olga.
Yes, absolutely. So we talked a lot about politics and about the things that are going on internationally and things that are going on around the country. But the main takeaway, I guess, from all of this is even forget the election for a moment, forget everything that is happening. As Christian Orthodox members of communities, it is incumbent upon us to come together and to discuss what are the core issues that we should get together and force upon our elected officials, our elected leaders, and how do we as a community together become that voice that will be represented first and foremost, that will have the access and that will have the influence where it matters, and how we as Orthodox Christian Americans who are patriots first and foremost impact some of these policies that we have talked about. And I think coming around Christian Orthodox Coalition, becoming members, reaching out to us, and talking about how to do this and going through some of the issues that we already outlined, which is the spiritual war, the culture war, the war on our children, the international wars, obviously, that are going on, the economy. All of these things impact us as Americans, but they also impact us as Orthodox Christians who see some of these issues through that conservative lens. So I think the main point here is that I'm hoping that you will share our website, our Twitter account. It is at COrthodoxC. People should reach out to us and talk to us about how we grow our network, how we grow this organization, and how we become impactful and organized just like other communities are, and how we have that seat at the table where it matters most.
Well put. I'm going to link. So I'll link to the Twitter and to the website. Is that the main two things
Please
you'd like?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be great.
Got it. Olga Ravasi, thank you so much for being here on Counterflow.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. All right. I hope you guys got something out of that. I loved that discussion with Olga Ravasi. Go check them out at their website. Just type in Christian Orthodox Coalition. Give them some help. And let's see if we can finally get Orthodox Christianity a voice at the table. As for this show, counterflowpodcast.com. Follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. Subscribe to our YouTube page. We are going to be doing a live stream very shortly here. If you subscribe to the YouTube page, you'll get notified. We're going to do one on what the heck happened in North Carolina. What should we not be depending on if something like that comes to your area? What can you do to prep for it? All of that and more. I'll keep you guys updated when we do this live stream with my special guest, Alex Brasco, friend of the show. And until then, and until next week, you guys have a good one.
You get split in half, like on the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.